Judge Thomas, I want to commend you for an extremely moving description about your early years, your relationship with your family, your grandfather, and really describing a situation which has existed for far too many people in our society. And I found it extremely moving, and a very fair characterization in terms of your own integrity and fairness. And I commend my colleague and friend John Danforth. I've had the good opportunity to serve in the Senate for many years, and I've heard many members of the Senate introduce nominees for various positions, and I've never heard one that has been more eloquent or heartfelt than Senator Danforth's statement. And for those of us who have respect for him and for his values, I want to say how much I certainly appreciated it. As you understand, we're questions of you or about your views of the Constitution and the role of government, and I'd like to, if I could, start out with the issue of the role of government in our society. You've, in several of your speeches and articles, you've taken a broad view of business rights, of an employer's interest in being free.
Will the Senator hold for a second? Would you close that door, please? Tell people in the hall to come in now or stay out for a while, okay? Because the Senator cannot be heard. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Chair. Right. Well, in a number of speeches and articles, you've taken a broad view of business rights, of an employer's interest in being free of government regulation. If confirmed, you'll be called upon to interpret the federal, state, and local laws protecting employees and regulating workplaces. And if you were hostile to these efforts and construed them narrowly as a result, you could seriously undermine our efforts to correct unsafe and unhealthy conditions that endanger millions of working men and women across the country. And I'd like to ask you about some of your statements on this important issue. In 1987 interview with a publication called Reason, you questioned the need for many important federal agencies. You said, and I quote, why do you need a Department of Labor? Why do you need a Department of Agriculture? Why do you need a Department of Commerce? You can go down the whole list. You don't need any of them, really. You were quoted correctly, were you not?
Senator, I, again, don't know the context of that quote. I don't know what I said before or after. Of course, I think all of us would certainly be in favor of, and I certainly count myself among those Americans who are for safe working environments and who are strongly for protections from abuses and exploitation from individuals who have more clout and more power. I'm for safe working environment, and I'm for the standards that protect workers. And I'm certainly, as I've made clear during my tenure at EEOC, strongly in favor of laws that prevent employers from discriminating against individuals.
Well, I'll put the full interview in the record. You were asked about various departments and agencies and the necessity for your own agency, I believe, as a matter of fact, and in response to do you remember at all the interview, I have it, I'll put it in the record. The inquirer said, I suspect that we might think that the EEOC ought not to exist. Why do you think that this agency should exist in a free society? Well, in a free, this is your answer. Free society, I don't think there'd be a need for it to exist. Had we lived up to our Constitution, had we lived up to the principles that we espouse, there would certainly be no need. There would have been no need. Unfortunately, the reality was that for politics reasons or whatever, there was a need to enforce anti-discrimination laws, or at least there was a perceived need to do that. Why do you need a Department of Labor? Why do you need a Department of Agriculture? Why do you need a Department of Commerce? You can go down the whole list. You don't need any of them.
From that quote, Senator, I think the point that I was trying to make, there are certain individuals who think you don't need any government involvement, who felt that EEOC should not exist, for example. Well, in a perfect world, you don't need EEOC, but this is not a perfect world. In a perfect world, you probably wouldn't need a Department of Labor or a Department of Agriculture.
Well, why?
This is not
if you take a Department of Labor with enforcement of, say, OSHA regulations, a Department of Agriculture trying to deal with food inspection, Department of Commerce trying to ensure that American workers are going to be competing with a fair playing field. I was just wondered even in why you might suggest that those agencies, as well as others.
Well, let me explain, I think, the point that I was trying to make. I believe, and I would have to go back and look at the entire question, but the point is this. There are some individuals who say, well, we don't need any government. We don't need EEOC. Why should there be an EEOC? Well, if there were no discrimination in the world, I don't think you and I would think that there was a need for EEOC. The reality is, though, that there is discrimination in the world. You could ask rhetorically, what is the need for other departments if this were a perfect world? The answer is, this is not a perfect world. If this were a perfect world, you wouldn't have to enforce health and safety laws. But the answer is that there are some people who violate health and safety laws, and you and I think many others, think that people should be protected from those sorts of individuals.
Well, don't statements like these suggest a hostility on your part to attempts by government to help people that can't help
No,
themselves?
Senator, I think I was actually defending the effort in instances where there is a need for the government to participate and for the government to have a role. There were many individuals. I remember sitting down with an individual early in my tenure at EEOC, and his first words were to me in a very pleasant way but firm, you know, I don't think this agency should exist. But I spent a considerable amount of time defending the need for this agency and defending the need for a specific role of the government in certain areas.
Well,
and I think that was the point I was trying to make there.
Just to read that these final words of yours, after you said you don't need any of them, I think, though, if I had to look at the role of government and what it does in people's lives, I see the EEOC as having much more legitimacy than the others if properly run. Now you run the risk that the authority can be abused. When EEOC or any organization start dictating to people, I think they go far beyond anything that should be tolerated in this society. Well, now, in a speech at the Pacific Research Institute in 1987, you criticized entitlement programs. This is what you said. The attack on freedom and rights had to be accompanied by their redefinition. In the socialist view, the new freedom was thus only another name for the old demand for an equal distribution of wealth. The new freedom meant freedom from necessity, and it was a short road to what we call today entitlements. Before, a right meant the freedom to do something. Now a right has come to mean, at least in some, unfortunately, growing circles, the legal claim to receive and demand something. Which entitlements were you referring to as socialism? Social Security or Medicare, unemployment insurance, student
I don't
loan?
think I referred to any of them specifically, Senator. I think I was trying to make the distinction between what we traditionally consider rights and freedoms versus programs that are specifically implemented or initiated by the government. I don't think that my comment there was one where I was looking at a specific governmental program and saying that this is an entitlement program that I think is bad or good. I think there's a comparison, there's a debate, and I thought it was a vibrant debate about what our rights and what our freedoms were.
Well, what's your view about entitlements?
I think that I've said in speeches, and I think that it's appropriate. There are many of us.
Stan.
I think that I have said in speeches, and I think that programs, there are certain programs in our society that have helped. I remember visiting my mother in Fellwood Homes, which is a federal housing project in Savannah, Georgia. Fellwood Homes was seen as what? It was seen, we lived in a tenement, she moved to a lane, a dirt street, and a move up in the world, a stepping stone, was Felwood Homes, before she could then move to something better. I thought that those programs were good. I think we all, though, in a pluralistic society are concerned that sometimes when we do something that we hope is good, that it may, on some occasions, have a negative impact. And I think that it's not illegitimate to say that some of these programs, or at least some of the ramifications, may not be what we expected, and some of the consequences may be unintended consequences. But I certainly believe that the efforts on behalf of providing public housing to my mother, or the efforts of providing relief to individuals who could not receive jobs, et cetera, in my neighborhood were very, very good efforts.
Well, of course, as you know, there are certain programs which are entitlements and other programs which are not, and I think all of us understand some various programs work well, others do not. And I'm sure we as an institution don't do as well as we should in sorting out the ones that do not. But entitlements have a special position. They certainly do from a budgetary position, and they've been selected by the Congress, basically in a bipartisan way, because they have a certain relevancy, because they have had an evaluation. And when you mention something like Social Security, student loan programs, various crop insurance programs, some of the other half a dozen or so, because there's only that many, some of the particular programs for children, those are considered entitlements. And I didn't know you're bunching those together as in the same, or within the same paragraph, is talking about the socialist view. The new freedom was that thus only another name for the old demand for equal distribution, effectively entitlements.
Well, certainly I, again, don't remember the full context of that, but let me just say this, Senator. I was not speaking in a budgetary sense or a more technical sense. I think I was comparing two views of what rights are today, and I thought it was, as I said, an important discussion and an important debate.
In 1988 article, you stated that, and I quote, "Our current explosion of rights, welfare rights, animal rights, children's rights, and so on, goes on to the point of trivializing them." Which children rights do you object to?
I guess I don't object to rights. The only point I was making, Senator, and it wasn't in any way undermining the need to be concerned about these problems in our society. I certainly have been involved with organizations to make sure that kids are not abused, and I certainly spend my time trying to make sure that kids are given guidance and help. I think that's very, very important in our society. But my point was that when we talk about rights that we consider basic or fundamental or freedoms, that when you begin to attach the word right to a particular effort or cause or program that you believe in, that then the notion of rights becomes one that's commonly used as opposed to reserved for these very, very important rights that we believe in. Again, that's not in any way saying that there is no problem, but simply saying that it becomes a common experience to simply declare a particular right.
Well, the reason I'm really questioning is this line of questioning is to get some kind of sense about your view about various statutes that will be approved by the Congress to address what the Congress believes are areas of need, and whether from these statements that it's fair to draw any implications of some hostility to statutes which would be drafted by the Congress to try and focus in the areas of particular needs or protections. For example, the OSHA for protecting the workplace, or whether it's the food inspections, or whether it is in terms of trade, or whether it is in terms of even parental leave, which you've expressed some degree of hostility to in your statements. The real question is whether we can we draw any conclusion as to the degree of hostility that you might have by yourself in interpreting statutes, given these kinds of statements, when perhaps there's an approach to trying to deal with these kinds of conditions that you may or may not agree with?
Well, Senator, I think that when one is in a policy-making function, just as if I were in this body, I could debate with you, and I think quite legitimately, about my concerns in particular areas. I think you have a sort of a role, or at least a part of your function would be an advocate for a particular point of view. But when you make a decision, when you write a statute, when this body deliberates and concludes, whether I agreed or not, in a policy-making function, when I operate as a judge, or when I decide a case and look at it as a judge, I am no longer an advocate for that policy point of view. My job is to interpret your intent, not to second-guess your intent. It's not to second-guess what you think is the appropriate policy. It's not to second-guess whether or not you're right, not to second-guess whether I think it would be better to have 10 more rules as opposed to the 5 that you have, but simply to determine what you felt was right, what you felt was correct, and what your intent was, and to apply that. And that's the way I see my role now as a judge.
Well, it's helpful because many of the decisions are going to be made by the court over the period of these next years are going to reflect the basic tension that exists between an executive and a Congress in the development of legislation and what the court is going to say on many of these matters. It's increasingly the factor at the present time. And so your view about how you approach this is, I think, very important, and particularly in light of these earlier comments. Let me move to another subject area, and this is referring to an article about you in the Atlantic Monthly, 1987. You said that hiring disparities could be due to cultural differences between men and women. This is the article Question of Fairness by Juan Williams. That article states that you said that it could be that women are generally unprepared to do certain kinds of work by their own choice. It could be that women choose to have babies instead of going to medical school. Do you still think that that explains the underrepresentation of women in so many jobs in our economy today?
I think it's important to state this unequivocally, and I've said this unequivocally in speech after speech. There is discrimination. There is sex discrimination in our society. My only point in discussing statistics is that I don't think any of us can say that we have all the answers as to why there are statistical disparities. For example, if I sit here and I were to look at the statistics in this city, say with the example of number of blacks, I couldn't and compare the number of blacks that's on that side of the table, for example. I cannot automatically conclude that that is a result of discrimination. There could be other reasons that should be explored that aren't necessarily discriminatory reasons. I am not justifying discrimination, nor would I shy away from it. But when we use statistics, I think that we need to be careful with those disparities.
Very little I could differ with you in the comment, but I was really driving a different point, and that is whether you consider women are generally unprepared to do certain kinds of work by their own choice. It could be that women choose babies instead of going to medical school. Let me just move on to your comments about Thomas Sowell, an author whose work you respect and many of whose ideas you've stated that you agree with. Mr. Sowell wrote in a book called The Civil Rights Rhetoric, a Reality. You reviewed that book for the Lincoln Review in 1988 as part of a review of the works of Thomas Sowell. And in particular, you praised Mr. Sowell's discussion, chapter 5 of his book entitled A Special Case of Women, and you called it a much-needed antidote to cliches about women's earnings and professional status. Mr. Sowell explains that women are paid 59% of what men receive for the same work by saying that women are typically not educated as often in such highly paid fields as mathematics, science, and engineering, nor attracted to physically taxing and well-paid fields such as construction work, lumberjacking, and coal mining, and the like. As a matter of fact, there were no women employed in the coal mine industry in 1973. 1980, after the federal government had begun an effort to enforce anti-discrimination laws, that 3,300 women working in coal mines. Does that surprise you at all?
If there's discrimination, it doesn't surprise me. And there were lots of places, I think, in our society. You know, I used to, when I can remember in my own classrooms looking around and realizing that 7 or 8 of the top 10 students in my classroom in grammar school were the smartest students, and wondering at that age, if 8 of 10 of them are the brightest, then why aren't there women doctors and why aren't there women lawyers? But the point that I was making with respect to Professor Soul, again a statistical one, there is a difference between the problem that, say, a 16-year-old or 18-year-old minority kid, female in this city or in Savannah or across the country, who's about to, who's dropped out of high school. There's a difference between that, the problems of that child or that student, and then there is for someone who has a PhD or someone who has a college degree. And I thought that it would be more appropriate, again, referring back to the programs that you talked about, that we talked about earlier, in looking at how to solve these problems, that you disaggregate the problems and you be more specifics instead of lumping it all into one set of statistics.
Mr. Soul goes on to suggest that employers are justified in believing that married women are less valuable as employees than married men. He says that if a woman is not willing to work overtime as often as some other workers or needs more time off for personal emergencies, then they may make her less valuable as an employee or less promotable to jobs with heavier responsibilities. He says the physical consequences of pregnancy, childbirth alone, are enough to limit a woman's economic option. And then he reaches some troubling conclusions about women in the workplace based on stereotyped gender roles. Yet you called those descriptions of women workers a much-needed antidote to cliches. Aren't those views the very cliches that women have been trying to escape from so long?
Senator, I think that that someone like a Tom Sowell is certainly one who is good at engaging a debate. And I think it's important that there be individuals who look at statistics in his way. Well, I did not indicate that, first of all, that I agreed with his conclusions, but I think this is an important point. I had, during my tenure, I think the majority of the members of my own personal staff and were women. And the conclusion, for example, about married women, I found certainly not supported by my experience with married women on my staff. That was not the point. The point is that I think sometimes that we can be involved in debate and make generalizations, and it's always good to have someone who has a different point of view and has some facts to debate that.
Well, the reason I raise this is because with regards to this particular description of women, you described that chapter as a much-needed antidote to cliches, and I think it's. I think many women would read his description, particularly in that chapter, as being really a description of the stereotype, attitude, which has really kept them back in too many instances. I'm sure you're commendable for what you've done, and that's a powerful factor in relationship, obviously, with other statements or speeches. But nonetheless, that chapter really stands out, and that's why I wanted to bring this up.
Well, I think that, again, Senator, I think it's important that in our society and as a policymaker that you have debate. I don't think that Professor Soul or others are in any way sexist or in any way people who would discriminate. I made it a point. It was very important to me during my tenure at EEOC, and it's been very important to me during my life to make sure that these arbitrary stereotypes, that these arbitrary discriminatory barriers were knocked down. And I think you can simply look at my record in promoting women to the senior executive service. I think it's second to none in the federal government. Similarly, with respect to my personal staff. I think it is important. I do think that discrimination exists, and I think it needs to be eradicated. But at the same time, when we do have approaches in our society, I think that reasonable people can disagree, and reasonable people of goodwill can disagree without being characterized in a negative way.
Okay, if just in the final part of my questioning, I'd like to come back to just an area that was raised by Chairman Biden in the concluding part of his questions, and that was with regard to the Lehrman essay. And you, in the speech in '87, you called why black Americans should look to conservative policies. You spoke about natural law. You said, and I quote, Heritage Foundation trust Lou Lehrman recent essay in American Spectator on the Declaration of Independence and the meaning of the right to life is a splendid example of applying natural law. And the title of the Lehrman article you endorsed is The Declaration of Independence and the Right to Life. One leads unmistakably from the other. The article makes only one argument, and it's about only one subject, that natural law protects the right to life, and that as a result the Constitution must be interpreted to protect the right to life. So Lehrman's basic position in that is that abortion violates the constitutional right to life. And he argues that when the Supreme Court decided Roe v. Wade, it simply conjured up a right of abortion. And he calls it a spurious right born exclusively of judicial supremacy with not a single trace of lawful authority. He also draws a parallel between those who support abortion and those who supported slavery. He says the decision to protect a woman's right to abortion has resulted in a Holocaust. These extreme statements, perhaps about, in terms of whatever, about a woman's right to choose, were all expressed in that article, and you called that article splendid. Is that correct?
Senator, again, I did not endorse the article, but I'd like to make this point, and it's very important, and it's perhaps one that was missed earlier. My interest toward the end of the Reagan administration was an important interest to me, and that was that I had spent almost a decade of my life battling with individuals who were conservative, and I felt that they should not be antagonistic to civil rights, and I felt that in fact they should be very aggressive on civil rights. In exploring on a part-time basis and during my busy work day a unifying theme on civil rights and on the issue of race, I was looking for a way to unify and find a way to talk about slavery and civil rights, the way that the abolitionists used. The very same approach that was used and offered in the Brown v. Board of Education brief, authored among others by my predecessor, by Justice R. Marshall, whose seat I've been nominated to fill. My point was that I figured, or that I concluded, that conservatives would be skeptical about the notion of natural law, but one of their own had endorsed it. And I simply wanted to give some authenticity to my approach so that I could then move on and get them to consider being more aggressive on the issue of civil rights. That was very, very important to me.
Well, have you ever publicly stated that you disagree with the article?
I have never been called on. It's never been raised as an issue. It was considered, I think, by many as a throwaway line. I saw it as that, as something to consider to convince my audience, and it's never really come up. As I indicated, I don't think that you can use natural law as a basis for constitutional adjudication, except to the extent that it is the background of in our Declaration. It is a part of the history and tradition of our country, and it's certainly something that informed some of the early litigation, I guess, with respect to the 14th Amendment. But it's certainly something that has informed our Constitution. But I don't think that it has an appropriate role directly in constitutional adjudication.
Well, do you disagree with the article now?
I do disagree with the article, and I did not endorse it before. My point was simply, and I think it was an important point, that I endorse natural law.
And
That I use natural law to make the point that the conservatives should aggressively enforce civil rights.
well, do I understand now you do disagree with the article?
I disagree in the manner that he used it, yes. I disagree with the article, yes.
Okay. Can you elaborate? What?
Well, to the extent that he uses natural law to make a constitutional adjudication in that sense, or to provide a moral code of some sort, I disagree with it.
But with regards to the other features of the article?
I don't know all the other features of the article. My interest was a very single-minded interest, Senator, and that was in trying to convince a conservative audience in the Lou Lehrman Auditorium of the Heritage Foundation with a concept that Lou Lehrman adopted to make my point.
Right.
And it was an important point to me. I did not endorse, nor do I now endorse, other portions of his article.
Did you mentioned in that speech, did you say anything else about Lou Lehrman? I mean, he's a trustee of the Heritage Foundation, other work that he's done. Did you say anything else other than endorsing this article? I mean, most of us in these kinds of circumstances, perhaps are looking about gilding the lily or so, but I mean, there are different ways of doing it. I'm just asking whether you talked about his work as a trustee of the Heritage Foundation or other work that he's done, or was the only reference to Mr. Lehrman about this article?
His use of natural law was the only reference. And again, Senator, this has not been something that has come up in a way that required explication. The important point for me was a very simple point, and that was that I was attempting to convince conservatives, individuals whom I thought would be skeptical about the notion of natural law and skeptical about aggressive enforcement of civil rights the way that I believe that civil rights should be enforced, that here was a basis on which they could be aggressive. And I thought it was an important speech, and I saw it, the manner in which it was quoted prior to my nomination to this court was one in which I was criticizing the administration and criticizing conservatives.
Well, I didn't find any reference to civil rights in the Lehrman article.
No, but throughout my speech there is reference.
I've read that. Just finally, did you agree with any parts of the article, the Lehrman article?
My only interest, again, was in the notion that he used natural law. I don't think that natural law can be used to adjudicate the issue that he adjudicated.
Time is up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.